I'd like to stay with the idea of invulnerability for a while because it's a counterintuitive concept. We always feel that our best interests are going to be served by being invulnerable, and every little reflex that we've got, every instinct in our whole body seems to be pointing us in the direction of becoming less vulnerable rather than more vulnerable. Nobody likes being vulnerable. It could be said that to be vulnerable is to be in a state of pain, really, because if we're not used to being vulnerable and all of a sudden we are, that's terrifying, because for us, being vulnerable by definition has been a very unwanted state of affairs, because if we've been working so hard to not be feeling vulnerable our whole lives, which is generally what we do, then to suddenly have vulnerability thrust upon us, so to speak, is absolutely terrifying, because our logic will tell us that this is a very terrifying thing. It's a very dangerous thing. But it isn't. It's just that, in a way, we've become unnatural in the sense that we seek invulnerability rather than appreciating the benefits of being vulnerable. And we're so unused to being vulnerable that it becomes overwhelming. But this isn't to say that it's actually a pathological thing. It's very, very hard to be okay about it when we've spent a long time fighting against it and covering up all vulnerability. But that still doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It just means it's a good thing that we haven't got used to yet. But this is not only counterintuitive with regard to a person who's suffering and doesn't want to be any more vulnerable than they already are, it also applies to therapists. It's counterintuitive for therapists because, as a therapist, I automatically assume that empowering my client or my patient is the way to go, so as to make them less vulnerable, give them a few extra tricks that they can use, give them some skills, empower them to do things that will make them less vulnerable to whatever it is that's happening. And in the current climate, this is very much our thinking on the subject. We seek to empower our clients. We teach them stuff. We train them. We encourage them to do things so as to feel less vulnerable to their emotions, feel less vulnerable to fear, to their insecurities, to their anxieties. And amazingly enough, this has become mental health therapy in this present time. This is how we see therapy. We're in full flight from vulnerability. And you might doubt that this is the case, because it doesn't ever say in any of the textbooks vulnerability is a bad thing and we have to cover it up with skills and tools and basically stuff to help us be in control. It doesn't say that anywhere, but that's implicit. The fact that we're putting all of our money on doing rather than being necessarily, inevitably, unquestionably means that we are in full flight from our vulnerability, and we don't see that there's any good can be coming out of vulnerability. It's an embarrassing thing. If I walk around with a big tear in my invulnerability shield, that's a dreadful thing. It's as if I'm no longer decent. Things can hurt me. Things can get at me. life can get at me. And any doing at all doing, or purposeful doing, is about being invulnerable, or trying to be invulnerable, or trying to create the illusion of invulnerability. So this is a statement we can make. Absolutely all purposeful doing, without any exception at all, is always geared towards making us invulnerable. And there's no way anyone can argue against that. Once you look into it, you see this has got to be the case. It's absolutely got to be the case. It's a mystery why we don't see it quicker, really. And maybe it's not a mystery. The reason we don't see it quicker is because of our cultural blind spot, our blinkeredness, that our societal blindness, which we are partaking in. Each one of us partakes in, because we're part of society. We can't help partaking in its blindness. But what happens when we do something, when there is a purposeful action, is that something is to be achieved, some goal is to be attained. But when it comes to invulnerability isn't a goal to be attained. It isn't something to be achieved. We can't successfully control so as to be invulnerable. That would be the same as successfully controlling so that we're not controlling. So we control ourselves so much, so effectively, so thoroughly, that we're not actually controlling ourselves at all. And obviously that doesn't make any sense. Obviously that's ridiculous. There's no way we can control ourselves towards a state of not controlling. And yet not controlling is the healthy state of affairs, where we don't have to control our emotions, where we don't have to control how we see the world, or we don't have to control what thoughts come our way. We just don't have to control. Whatever comes, comes. That's clearly the healthy way. If we imagine walking around the place, going about our daily business, constantly controlling ourselves, constantly staying one step ahead of the emotions that might come, the thoughts that might come, the memories that might come, the emotional reactions, the associations that might come to us from listening to other people or from being in certain situations. If we have to be controlling against to stop all that happening the whole time, that isn't me being in life. That's me being in a cocoon of controlling, and all I'm aware of is the cocoon, the inside of the cocoon. And the inside of the cocoon of controlling contains two possibilities. It contains the euphoria of successful controlling, when I get things to be the way that I want them to be. And it also contains the dysphoria of unsuccessful controlling, which also includes the fear that even if things are being controlled at the moment, the signs are there that everything's going to come on top soon, and the vessel's going to spring a leak and I won't be able to control. So there's the fear of not being able to control, and there is the actual thing itself of not being able to control. So we have those two things that we can do. We can experience the euphoria of being in control and the dysphoria of either not being in control or fearing that we won't be in control. There really aren't any other possibilities there in the cocoon of controlling. There aren't any other possibilities there. That's it. That's our life in a nutshell. As we might say, there's either winning or losing. But this is deeply unhealthy, even though it's natural. It's unhealthy in as much as if we do win, then we've succeeded in being invulnerable. We've succeeded in controlling everything so that nothing gets to happen unless we are okay about it happening. So that type of success, with that type of success, who needs failure? And the experience of going around in our cocoon and feeling dysphoric because the cocoon is failing us or threatening to fail us, we could say that that's not healthy either. That's not mental health. Though in a way, it's healthier than succeeding. It's healthier than having the illusion that we're in control, the illusion that we're invulnerable. It's healthier because when we start to see that we're not, or we start to fear that we're not, that's got rid of one illusion. We're one step closer to reality. So in conventional terms, people would say, oh, you're suffering from a mental health condition or some form of neurotic disturbance. That's not good, because your comfort bubble, your cocoon of controlling isn't working as well as it used to. And on a very superficial level, if my life's come to a standstill, I can no longer function very much and I'm suffering a lot, we could say, okay, there's something happening here that isn't, that needs to be looked at. But really, we can't say that's unhealthy, not when we really understand the nature of the process that's going on here. And the nature of the process that's going on here is that when health returns to us, when we become more aware or when we start to grow, that isn't because we wanted it to. It's not a result of our doing. It happens despite our doing. It happens against our will. And that's why we pathologize it, because by definition, anything that's against my will, surely it must be bad, because I didn't want it and I don't want it, so it must be bad. So in order to see through this, we'd have to understand that what we want is itself the unhealthy thing. To want to be in control, to want to be invulnerable is the unhealthy thing. The unhealthy thing is what I'm doing, what I'm wanting to do, what I'm successfully doing, maybe. And so when this other thing happens, which is exactly what I don't want, that's actually healthy, that's actually good. And the fact that I don't like it and don't want it, and I'm very afraid of it happening, doesn't mean that it's a bad thing at all. We always fight against what is beneficial to us, wholesome to us. That's just the way human beings are wired. We're wired back to front. We fear freedom and we are very attracted to security. Security looks so good to us, or we could call that invulnerability. It's the same thing. It looks so good to us, so wonderful. We could spend a whole life trying to get there. But actually what we're trying to get to is a state of suffering beyond our ability to imagine or comprehend. It's pure, concentrated suffering, absolute torment, unendurable torment. The type of torment no one could tell you about. You have to kind of taste it yourself, really. But you can tell. You can tell if someone else is suffering a lot, and you can tell that it's there, but you can't really see just how tormenting it is. So we're attracted to that, and being attracted to security or invulnerability is the very same thing as being repelled by freedom, afraid of freedom. We're afraid of freedom, we run away from freedom. Now that is how human beings are wired. This has been pointed out by lots of psychotherapists. It's well known. It's like, I don't know, if you were to do a very simple book on psychotherapy for psychotherapists or for whoever else, that would be number one, just to understand the lay of the land, how we work, how human beings tick. We're afraid of freedom and we're addicted to security, even though freedom is the only place where our well-being can reside. And even though insecurity, there's only one thing resides there, and that's hell. That's a hell state. So if we understand that, that's good. And if we understand that, we can see that straight away. A healing process is not going to be one that I instigate or bring about, because I see I see it as being good for me. The healing process is going to be totally in opposition to my will, my defenses, my whole logic, my whole way of seeing the world. And if we can understand that, then that really helps an awful lot. Because even though we will still run away from freedom, we'll still keep on running away from freedom and trying to reach the secure place, we're no longer buying into that. So we can see that it's part of the inversion that comes about as a result of the thinking mind and its need to control and its idea that it can control, and that idea, and the idea that we actually know what's going on and we know what's good and what's bad, and we know that what's right for us, what's helpful for us, because that is an illusion. We don't. We've got everything backwards. So really we can say that the essence of the thing, the real essence of the thing, is allowing ourselves to be as vulnerable as we really are, to allow that vulnerability, to see it as not being an absolute evil to be fought against. As Pema Chodron says, to value our vulnerability. And that's nice and simple. That's not a hard idea to get across. But the thing is, the point that follows on from that is we can't do anything in order to be vulnerable, because all our doing is for the sake of making ourselves less vulnerable. How can we do invulnerability? I could put an act on. How can we do vulnerability? I could put an act on to be vulnerable, but that's me playing safe. I'm pretending to be vulnerable because I think that's a good thing. I can't actually pretend to be vulnerable. Being vulnerable is the most sincere thing there is. There's no pretense there. There's no need to pretend, because it would be stupid to try to pretend, to kid ourselves that we're being vulnerable when actually we're guarded. Which is to say we don't do that, but it's obviously a stupid thing to do. It's ridiculous. It's unnecessary, because we're already vulnerable, and all we have to do is tap into our actual, authentic, genuine vulnerability. And when we do that, that is a sincere act, we could say. It's not an act in the sense of a doing, because we're not doing it, but it's a moment of sincerity, which is such a precious thing. Sincerity is such a rare commodity, and to be in this place where we know we're being sincere, even though we may not appreciate it every time, we're actually touching base with something that's really real. And reality is the only place the good stuff can come from, healing can come from, growth can come from, if we're being subtly insincere with ourselves, which we are all the time. That's what it means to be identified with the ego construct. It means we're being insincere the whole time, absolutely the whole time. We're playing a clever game. That's what the ego construct does, plays a clever game. Or what it thinks is a clever game. Sometimes it plays a stupid game, but it's still trying to be clever. But as long as we are playing a game, we're not being vulnerable. There's no such thing. We play games in order to be invulnerable. Maybe we're playing at being vulnerable, but we're playing at it and we're actually invulnerable, so we're just putting on an act. So there is this situation where the only thing that's really going to work is when we're vulnerable. And we can't be vulnerable on purpose. It's not a result of it. There's no strategies for being vulnerable. There's no training that we can enlist on to be better at being vulnerable. And so all of a sudden, we're in this situation where we can see, okay, if being vulnerable is the great thing, and there's no way that we can do vulnerability, that's all of our doing gone. That's all of our positive psychology. That's all of our positive psychotherapy out of the window. it's all useless because it's all about increasing our hallucinatory invulnerability, which is to say bolstering up the ego construct, because the ego construct is based upon hallucinatory invulnerability. So when we're super confident, super cocky, and we're just going around the place without a care in the world and being totally sure of ourselves, that's because our hallucinatory invulnerability is working properly. And then what happens in life, the integrity of this mechanism gets compromised and the shine goes off it, and all of a sudden the ego construct can't quite believe, once the rot sets in, the ego construct can't quite believe in its invulnerability anymore, no matter how hard it struggles to regain it. It's the kind of thing that once you see it, you can never really go back to having that naive sense of vulnerability. But all of our therapy is based on trying to help the ego construct to go back, to recover to how it used to be. But we can't go back. There's no going back. Things don't work like that. Once we've seen the truth, it's very, very hard to forget it. And the fact that we don't call the truth and we fight against it, and we call the truth something else, we call it a pathological process or something, it doesn't make any difference. We still can't forget it. The reason it's so hard to fight against it is because there's truth in it. In our world of illusions and self-deceptions and insincerities, a little bit of truth has got there, like some kind of deadly toxin. It's going to bring everything down. It's going to bring the castle that we've built on the basis of our illusions. It's going to bring that down. So all of a sudden we're in this situation where we'd have to ask, well, what do we as therapists do? What do we do to help our clients feel okay about being vulnerable? Okay, thanks for watching.